Welcome back to the True Tomorrows podcast. I'm Adrian Smith, and I'm excited to be your guide today as we take a look into a potential future that's,
Equal parts thrilling and thought-provoking.
Exactly.
And I'm Julia Jones, here to help unpack all the twists and turns, the science, fact, and fiction, and maybe ask some...
Oh, yeah, some tough questions along the way.
Definitely.
You know, we always say this show's about exploring the wild world of tomorrow, but today's story is...
It is a little different.
Yeah, it's about what happens when innovation meets desperation and how even the best intentions can lead to unforeseen consequences.
Exactly. It's less about gadgets and gizmos and more about that primal human drive to survive, especially when faced with a crisis like the one in our story.
That's right.
Today.
So for our Imagine a World segment today, picture a world ravaged by drought. Dust storms swirl through ghost towns, cracked earth stretches as far as the eye can see.
Oh, wow.
And every drop of water is precious.
It's a scenario that unfortunately is becoming more and more real in some parts of our world today. And in this story, that desperation pushes a group of teenagers to do something extraordinary.
These aren't your typical kids glued to their phones.
No.
They're tinkerers, inventors, driven by the need to save their community from a slow and painful demise.
Yeah.
They call themselves the Rainmakers.
Yeah.
And they're about to turn this parched world upside down.
And what's fascinating about them is their resourcefulness. Forget state-of-the-art labs or big-budget research grants. These kids are using salvaged tech scraps of knowledge from dusty textbooks and a whole lot of ingenuity to build a machine
That's amazing.
that can actually make it rain.
It's a true underdog story, wouldn't you say?
Right.
They're going up against not just the drought, but probably skepticism from adults
Oh, absolutely.
who think they're in over their heads.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They actually succeed. Can you imagine that the parched village, everyone on edge, and then on the horizon,
Oh, wow.
storm clouds?
Yeah.
Those first drops of rain must have felt like a miracle.
They become instant local heroes, right? I mean, who wouldn't celebrate kids who figured out how to bring life back to a dying land?
You'd think so, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The story takes a darker turn when the authorities, specifically the military, take notice. They see the Rainmaker's invention not as a miracle, but as a potential weapon, a way to control a vital resource
Oh, I know.
in a thirsty world.
So these kids who set out to help their community suddenly find themselves labeled as fugitives on the run from the very people they tried to save.
This is where the story starts to ask some tough questions about power control and the unintended consequences of even the most well-intentioned technology.
Wow.
Who gets to decide how this rainmaking tech is used?
That's a good question.
The kids who created it driven by compassion, or the authorities who see its potential for, let's just say, less altruistic purposes?
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? The clash between those who want to use knowledge for good and those who see it as a tool for control, maybe even profit.
Exactly, and in the story, this sets off a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The Rainmakers, using their understanding of the very weather they can now manipulate, trying to stay one step ahead of the military.
Hold on. They're using the weather as a weapon.
Oh, yeah.
I'm picturing them creating diversions, maybe even storms, to throw off their pursuers.
You talk about turning the tables.
You got it. And the author does a fantastic job of showing how, as the Rainmakers push their technology further, try to stay ahead of the game, they start to lose control. The rain, once a blessing, begins to become a force of destruction.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. They're playing with forces they don't fully understand.
Right.
And nature, as we know, can be a pretty unforgiving teacher.
It's a classic case of hubris, right? Thinking we can control nature only to find out we've unleashed something we can't contain.
And within the group itself, doubts start to creep in. Are they heroes, or have they become the villains of their own story? Welcome back to the True Tomorrows podcast. Before we jumped back into this story, we left the Rainmakers grappling with a moral dilemma: keep running or risk pushing their tech too far.
Yeah, it's a tough spot. They're on the run, their creation is causing unintended damage, and they're starting to question everything.
They're hiding out in the ruins of an old dam, which I think is a really cool symbolic choice by the author. Here's this monument to humanity's attempts to control nature, and it's crumbling just like their own plans are starting to fall apart.
It's like a visual metaphor for the whole story, right? The dam meant to hold back water is now a shelter from the very storms they're creating. Talk about irony.
Exactly. And the story doesn't shy away from the scientific nitty-gritty either. We see the rainmakers debating cloud seeding techniques, arguing about atmospheric pressure, trying to calculate the energy needed to pull off their most ambitious plan yet.
Cloud seeding, for those who don't know, is a real thing. It's like giving the atmosphere a nudge to create rain,
Yeah.
but it's notoriously unpredictable. Imagine trying to do that on a global scale.
Right. And these kids, with their salvaged tech, are essentially trying to hack the planet's weather system. They believe that one final upgrade to their machine can solve the global drought, bring life back to the world.
But as you said before, it's a gamble. They're tinkering with forces they barely understand. What if they make things worse?
Right.
What if they trigger some kind of ecological disaster?
And that's the heart of the dilemma, isn't it? They've tasted victory, they know their invention works, but they're also staring down the barrel of potentially catastrophic consequences.
It's that classic sci-fi trope, playing God. We think we have the solution, but we rarely consider the full scope of what messing with nature can do.
And the story doesn't let us forget that. It reminds us that nature is powerful, complex, interconnected. You can't just tweak one thing without causing ripples elsewhere.
So they go for it.
Yeah.
They push their machine to the limit.
Yeah. They do. It's a tense scene. They're huddled in this crumbling dam, the ground literally shaking as they channel energy from the old infrastructure to power their upgraded machine.
Wait, they're using the dam itself to power their invention? That's pretty ingenious, if a little reckless. It's like they're taking this symbol of human control and turning it into a tool for, well, more control, but this time over the weather itself.
It's a high-risk, high-reward situation. And the way the author describes it, you can feel the tension, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. This is it, their last chance to save the world or maybe destroy it.
And then what? Does it work? Do they create a global rainstorm?
Well, something happens. The sky erupts, but not with gentle, life-giving showers. It's a deluge, a catastrophic downpour that engulfs the land. Remember all that cracked, dry earth we talked about? It can't absorb this much water this fast.
Oh, wow. So they went from one extreme to the other, drought to mega flood. They traded a slow run for a sudden violent disaster.
The author doesn't hold back on the imagery here. We see villages swept away, entire landscapes reshaped by the sheer force of water. It's a visceral reminder that nature, even when we think we've tamed it, always has the last word.
And the rainmakers, where are they in all of this? What are they thinking, feeling as their creation unleashes this chaos?
They're right in the thick of it, watching their dreams turn into a nightmare. The rain, once their symbol of hope, is now a raging torrent. And the story makes us confront a really tough question. Are they heroes who tried to do the right thing, or are they villains who've just unleashed a new kind of devastation?
That's heavy stuff. It really blurs the lines between good intentions and unintended consequences. And I'm guessing from the way you're describing it, there's no easy answer.
Right. The story doesn't tie things up with a neat little bow. It leaves us with this ambiguous ending, this image of Sky, the leader of the rainmakers watching the flood with a mix of despair and awe. The world is changing, reborn in a baptism of destruction, and they're the ones who made it happen.
That's powerful stuff. They wanted to save the world, and in a way they did. But at what cost? And is this new world, this flooded world, any better than the one they left behind?
Those are the questions the story wants us to grapple with, and I think they're questions that are relevant to all of us, not just in this fictional world, but in our own lives. How do we balance innovation with responsibility? How do we make sure our good intentions don't pave the road to unintended consequences?
It's a reminder that technology, no matter how well-intentioned, always comes with a price. And sometimes that price is higher than we can even imagine. Welcome back to the True Tomorrows podcast. We've been diving deep into a world ravaged by drought, where a group of teenage inventors called the Rainmakers took matters into their own hands.
And as we saw, their attempt to save their community from a slow death had some pretty drastic unintended consequences. It's a powerful reminder that even with the best intentions, messing with nature can backfire in ways we can't always predict.
Yeah, this whole story of the Rainmakers, their incredible machine and the deluge that reshaped the world, it really gets to the heart of what we try to do on this show. We explore those what-if scenarios, the potential futures that technology might bring, both the good and the bad.
And it's not just about the tech itself, right? It's about the human element, the choices we make, the responsibilities we have, especially when we're dealing with forces that are bigger than ourselves.
You know, one thing that's been swirling in my head this whole episode is the question of control. The Rainmakers set out to control the weather. And for a while it seemed like they had, but ultimately nature had the last laugh. It's like a cautionary tale, a reminder that we're not always in the driver's seat.
I think that's a brilliant insight. The story really highlights that tension between our desire to control our environment and the humbling reality that nature often has its own plans. It's like that saying, we can't control the wind, but we can adjust our sails.
And in this case, the Rainmakers adjusted their sails a little too aggressively, maybe. They were so focused on solving the immediate crisis that they didn't fully grasp the potential consequences of their actions. It makes you wonder, even if they had the best intentions, were they justified in taking such a risk?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the story doesn't give us an easy answer. It challenges us to think critically about the ethics of technological innovation, especially when it comes to something as fundamental as the weather. Who gets to decide when those risks are worth taking? Who bears the responsibility when things go wrong?
And even beyond the ethical questions, there's the psychological aspect. Can you imagine the weight these teenagers must be carrying? They went from being local heroes to, well, potentially causing a global catastrophe.
Yeah.
The guilt, the doubt, the sense of responsibility, that's got to be crushing.
Absolutely. The story touches on the emotional toll of innovation, the burden of knowledge, the realization that even when you're trying to do good, you can end up causing harm. It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't always linear, and sometimes the path to a better future is paved with difficult choices and unintended consequences.
So where does that leave us? What's the takeaway from this whole imagine a world scenario?
I think it's a call to action in a way. It's a reminder to stay informed, to engage in these conversations about technology and its impact on our lives, to think critically about the choices we're making today and how they might shape the world of tomorrow. Because the future is being written right now, and we all have a role to play in ensuring it's a future we can all live with.
Well said. And for our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Did it spark any ethical dilemmas for you? Any personal connections to the themes of innovation control and unintended consequences? Head over to our website or social media channels and share your reactions.
And if you enjoyed this exploration of tomorrow's possibilities, the potential impacts of technology on our lives, make sure to rate and follow the True Tomorrow's podcast. We've got more captivating stories lined up, each one designed to spark your imagination and challenge your assumptions about the future.
Until next time, this is Adrian Smith.
And Julia Jones signing off. Keep looking ahead, but don't forget to tread carefully. The future is waiting to be written, and the choices we make today will determine what that future looks like.